everybody. I hope you're having a great start to your New Year's. Something I'm going to start doing in the new year is more educational videos to help people understand certain things they may want to know about that I can help them understand. And the first one is going to be about PSSM. Why? Well, I had posted a video over the summer when Scrat had an episode of tying up. And I decided this would be a great time to post something educational out there to get the attention on it, because really it's not something that people really post about or talk about unless your horse is directly affected it. People just seem to think, oh, yeah, whatever, it don't affect me, when it actually could. So that sparked a lot of curiosity and interest into the subject, and I figured now is the best time out there to just go ahead and jump into it. So what is PSSM? Polysaccharide storage myopathy. That is a big fancy scientific name for it. And it is a genetic disease that affects the muscles in horses. It is the abnormal storage of sugars within the muscles, which can result in horses who are reluctant to move, stiff, can't move. The best way I describe it for somebody who doesn't understand it or know anything about it is it's like one giant muscle cramp. A giant Charlie horse that affects across their back, their top line, hindquarters, and you'll notice in their abdomen they also tense up. So if you ever had a Charlie horse in your leg and you cannot move, that is what it feels like for a horse who's having an episode of it. There are two types of PSSM, type 1 and type 2. Type 1, people know a lot about it because they were able to identify a genetic marker, GYS1, that has the mutation that causes the storage buildup, the sugars buildup in the muscles. And so their bodies are not able to break down that sugar for energy, and it gets stored in the muscles and wreaks havoc. Now, horses with PSSM1 only need one copy to be symptomatic. That's all it takes. If your horse is positive for one copy of it, they're going to be symptomatic, whether you want to believe it or not. All right? There is no argument there. It is not a dormant disease. It is one that, if they have it, they're going to show symptoms. Now, type 2 is, in a sense, an unknown characteristic and variations of symptoms. They don't know exactly what's causing it. They haven't pinpointed it, but they know about it. They know sort of what causes it. It sort of has the same symptoms as PSSM type 1, so it's treated relatively the same. However, a number of genetic variants have been found in horses who display type 2, but also some horses who display type 2 symptoms don't have those genetic variants, which is why it's extremely complex and confusing disease that is constantly in the works of trying to identify different markers, different genes that they have not been able to pinpoint. For type 1, there is a genetic test that is readily available through UC Davis, the AQHA. That is a hair test. You pluck some hairs, you send it off, and you can know if your horse has PSSM type 1. Now, type 2, there is not a genetic test yet. There is, but there isn't. There are genetic tests, but that's a touchy subject within the genetics and all that. But most commonly, those are identified in muscle tests, muscle biopsy, to where they go through and they analyze the muscle tissues. If your horse has had a recent episode, that's your most prime time to get them tested for type 2. If you have a mare that you plan on breeding, or even if you don't plan on breeding, get them tested just so you know. It never hurts to have a 5-panel test done, because then you know what could affect your horse. Maybe that's why you're having some issues with them that you wouldn't have put the points together. So how does PSSM affect the horse? So with PSSM, when the horses exercise, their bodies are not able to break down this extra sugar for energy that's being stored in the muscles, which is what is resulting in the muscles cramping. Signs and symptoms of PSSM can vary You can have a horse who only has 1 or 2 symptoms, or you can have a horse who has the whole shebang, the whole list. Now, there is a long list. So the signs are most often seen when you're putting horses into initial work, if they've had time off and you bring them back into work, if you take them on extremely intense rides or very long rides. And during an episode, the horse may seem lazy. He may seem like he all of a sudden has a lameness. He came up lame. Oh my gosh. They may tense up their abdomens, and you'll notice their flanks start to twitch, and tremors along their top line, their back muscles. Their hind end will be extremely tense and tight. They'll also start sweating. You'll notice their respirations they're starting to breathe a little harder, a little more frequent. Their heart rate gets elevated. Now, most horses with PSSM have a history of tying up after exercise, while some may only have 1 or 2 minor episodes a year. And as far as symptoms go, they're relatively the same for type 1 and type 2 horses. The only difference is for type 2, they do know that it affects the muscles a lot more. And what I mean by that is your muscle building. So you'll see horses who struggle to build the top line. They'll have that weak top line. Their neck will not be filled. They'll have that dip in front of the withers. They'll also have those hollow shoulders where the saddle sits. They will not have a full through the rump and loin areas. And their hindquarters will also be more peaked, and no matter what supplements you put them on, no matter what fancy exercise programs you have them on, they just really struggle to build and keep that top muscle. And so that is something common with type 2 that is not common with type 1. So the management of PSSM is relatively the same for both type 1 and type 2. Diet and exercise are the fundamental key points in maintaining and managing your horse's symptoms. So with exercise, you want to make sure that they're getting enough of it. They do not do well with riding for 2 days, having a week off, and picking back up. They will 9 times out of 10 have a tying up episode, and you'll be back to square one, because you have to slowly build them back up after an episode. You can't just send them into hard work. For your horse's living condition, you want to not stall them really as much as you possibly can. You want to avoid that. They do best on having open areas to move around freely. They also do best if you're exercising them regularly, preferably 5 to 6 days a week. And that first day back, if you do give them time off, you have to slowly incorporate it back into the regimen. You can't just, like I said, you can't just kick them into a hard workout. So you want to make sure, and if you're bringing them back from a break or an injury, you really want to treat it like an injury rehab, I guess. When you're bringing them back into a workout, you want to start slow and build up from there. Just like you would with a rehab horse. You don't just throw them into a full heavy workout. You start with walking and then add a little trotting. And then you build up your trotting to the point where you can add a little bit of loping, and so on and so forth. You just gradually build it. And same thing goes for if they have an episode. You just want to take your time again to build them back up to full extensive workouts that you're doing. Now, diet, for the most part, they're the same, but your PSSM type 1 horses are going to need more, pay close attention to their non-structural carbohydrate intake. So your sugar and your starches, that's how you get your NSC level. If you have a grain that has a 10% sugar and a 5% starch, you put those two together and you get 15%. So you want to make sure and cut out as much sugar and starch as possibly can, which means if you are feeding a sweet feed, anything with molasses and anything with your oats, barley, cob, whatever mix, you want to cut that out completely, because those have an astronomically high level of sugar and starch in them. There are feeds out there on the market that are targeted for horses with lower sugar and starch, but really it is a trial and error when it comes down to finding exactly what your horse can tolerate and what works best for the individual. What works for some horses might not work for others. One thing you want to watch for that a lot of people don't even seem to look at, because they're looking at the fat content, is rice bran. Rice bran is very high in sugar and starch, and so you want to, if you're needing a fat supplement, cut that out. Use an oil instead. That is a lot of the alternatives for PSSM horses who need more that added calories, is some kind of a vegetable oil. For hay, that again, it depends on the horse. Scrat, my guy, he does best on alfalfa. A lot of grass hays contain higher levels of sugars and starches, which send him into episodes. And so you want to watch your hay content of sugar as well. A lot of people don't think about that either. For your supplements, you want to add in your antioxidants, your vitamin E, magnesium is another one you want to add into their diet. If your horses need electrolytes, find something as natural as possible, because most electrolytes on the market contain sugar. And so you want to really read your labels when you're trying to find what you're feeding your horse, or even if you're just evaluating your diet of a horse you're feeding currently, look at your labels. A lot of them are pretty transparent about non-structural carbohydrates, especially the feed companies. But if you're running into something where you're not finding it out on the label, you can reach out to some groups on Facebook who are experts in the matter, and they have all kinds of files and lists of supplements and grains that are suited for your PSSM horses. With your type 2 horses, because of the muscle wasting and the struggle with top line building in the muscles in general, you want to add your proteins into that diet. And that really helps them utilize and build that muscle back, whereas it won't really affect how your type 1 horses are, because your type 1 horses don't have that issue. And that's one of the real main differences between type 1 and type 2. And like I stated, it really depends on your horse. It took me a couple years worth of trial and error of figuring out exactly what mine could handle and tolerate. And so it can be frustrating, very frustrating, but it's really important that you do your research, you do your reading, especially on your labels at home and your feed bags and your supplements, because there's a lot of hidden things in there that people don't notice and don't even think of. So that is a basic rundown of PSSM, and there is so many different articles out there from universities and such with different studies into type 1 and type 2 that you can really just go on for days reading. You can sort of just go down a rabbit hole, really, of one article after another. But even if you don't have a horse with PSSM, just reading about it